When Sundar Pichai recalled his roots, Narendra Modi bowed in admiration. The room was silent, yet it carried a strange tension. People had gathered in a large hall waiting for a moment they knew would be special. On the stage sat Sundar Pichai, the CEO known across the world, and beside him was Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Cameras were flashing, but it was not the lights that held attention. It was the quiet anticipation, the feeling that something deep was about to unfold. Sundar began with a soft voice, one that did not try to impress, but instead reached into the hearts of those listening. He said he wanted to speak not about technology or business, but about roots. His words created a pause in the air because nobody expected him to begin with something so personal. He described a small town in India where he grew up, where streets were dusty and homes were simple. He spoke of nights when electricity was uncertain and books were read under dim light. His story was not about success, but about struggle. People leaned forward. The audience was no longer thinking about his position or his global reputation. They were thinking of a boy in a small home, trying to dream bigger than what his world allowed. Sundar recalled his father, who worked long hours but never complained. He remembered his mother, who kept the family strong with quiet resilience. Every detail he shared carried weight, because it was not just his story. It was the story of countless families who believed in sacrifice, patience, and hope. Suddenly, Sundar stopped and smiled faintly. He said that even today, no matter how far he had traveled, the smell of the streets in his town, the sound of the morning temple bells, and the warmth of neighbors sharing food stayed alive within him. He said those memories gave him strength, and without them, he could not have faced the many battles of his journey. It was not money or fame that made him strong. It was the values of humility and kindness planted in him during those days. The room was silent again, but this time it was not tension. It was emotion. Many in the audience were wiping their eyes without realizing it. Sundar's words were not dramatic, yet they touched something deep. It felt like he had opened a window, allowing people to see their own childhood, their own struggles, and the silent sacrifices of their parents. Narendra Modi sat listening without moving. His face showed respect, but there was also something more. He was not just hearing Sundar's words, he was absorbing them. When Sundar finished, the hall waited for Modi's response. The Prime Minister leaned forward, his hands folded, his eyes steady on Sundar. Then, slowly, with a deep breath, he bowed his head. It was a gesture simple in movement but powerful in meaning. In that moment, it was not a Prime Minister bowing to a CEO. It was one son of India bowing to another. The hall filled with silence once again, but this silence was heavier, more meaningful than before. It was a silence that carried respect, humility, and pride. It was a silence that made everyone present feel part of something greater than themselves. But as the applause slowly began, Sundar raised his hand. He said there was more to share, more to remember. And with those words, he prepared to reveal a story hidden deeper in his past. The applause slowly faded, but the emotion in the hall did not. Sundar sat quietly for a moment, his eyes lowered as if searching through memories that still carried both pain and pride. When he looked up again, there was no smile, only honesty in his face. He said, "The world often sees success as shining, but the truth is that it is built on many silent struggles. Let me share one of them with you." The hall became still once more. Everyone felt he was about to reveal something he had rarely spoken of. Sundar's voice grew softer, yet each word carried weight. He described how, as a boy, he had to travel far for school. The roads were uneven, the buses were crowded, and sometimes he had to walk long stretches in the heat. He remembered days when he wished he could stay home, days when tiredness was too heavy. But then he recalled his father's words. His father had once placed a gentle hand on his shoulder and said, The road may be long, but your dream must be longer. Those words had stayed with him forever. He told the audience how, in those years, his family could not afford many things that seemed normal for others. Sometimes he could not buy new books, so he borrowed them. Sometimes he could not buy clothes, so he wore the same ones longer. There were nights when meals were simple and light, but his parents never allowed the family to lose hope. The audience could almost see that small boy walking with torn shoes, carrying a heavy school bag, and holding a dream that seemed impossible. Sundar explained that what kept him moving was not only ambition, but also resilience taught by his parents. They had shown him that respect for hard work, patience, and kindness to others were worth more than wealth. Sundar paused, and his eyes seemed to shine with unshed tears. He said, "Sometimes people ask me how I found courage when I faced challenges in America, where I was just another student with limited money. They think the courage began there, but the truth is it began much earlier. It began when my father took me to the local bus stand and said, 'Remember, you are not less than anyone, but never think you are above anyone either.' That balance gave me strength." His words reached deep into the audience. Many nodded, understanding the meaning of those lessons. Humility mixed with confidence, respect mixed with resilience. That was what gave him his foundation. Narendra Modi watched closely, his expression calm but filled with thought. When Sundar spoke about borrowed books, Modi's face softened, for he too had once studied under the dim light of small lamps. When Sundar described wearing old clothes, Modi's eyes carried memory, for he too had lived with less. It was as though two different journeys had met at one place, both marked by the same soil of struggle. Then came a surprising turn. Sundar shared how, during one of his school years, he was discouraged by a teacher who said he was too quiet, too shy, and might never stand out. Those words hurt him deeply, and for days he wondered if they were true. But instead of breaking, he chose silence as his strength. He listened more, he observed more, and slowly, he realized that being quiet did not mean being weak. It meant carrying thoughts deeper. He told the audience, "When you respect your own silence, the world begins to respect your words when you finally speak." Those lines struck like thunder in the hall. The people who had come expecting stories of innovation and technology were instead being given life lessons shaped by hardship. Narendra Modi leaned forward once again, his eyes fixed on Sundar. He raised his hand gently, asking to speak, and said, "What you shared today is not only your story, it is the story of India. Our land has always taught us resilience through simplicity, humility through hardship, and greatness through small beginnings." His voice was firm, yet his tone was filled with admiration. The audience broke into applause again, but Sundar lifted his hand softly, signaling that he was not finished. He said, "The most important test of resilience is not when life is easy, but when life puts you on the edge. And there was a moment like that in my family, one that changed me forever." His words created suspense. The audience leaned forward, waiting to hear what that moment was. Sundar looked down, took a breath, and prepared to tell a memory that had shaped not only his childhood, but also the man he would become. The hall was waiting in silence. Sundar's last words had left everyone curious. He had spoken of a moment that tested his family, a moment that shaped who he became. People leaned forward, their hearts already heavy with the emotion of his earlier memories. Sundar took a deep breath before he continued. He said, "There was a day in my childhood when I learned the real meaning of sacrifice. My father had worked long hours, but our family was still struggling. We had saved for months to buy a small thing for the house, something my mother had been waiting for. It was not a luxury, it was a simple item, but to us it felt big. Yet on the very day we were to buy it, my father came home with a different decision. He had used that money to pay for my school admission. Sundar's voice grew softer. I saw the disappointment in my mother's eyes, but she did not argue. She placed her hand on my shoulder and said, "This is not a loss. This is an investment. We can live without things, but we cannot live without dreams." The hall fell into deep silence. Many people in the audience lowered their heads, thinking of their own parents, their own sacrifices that were never spoken about but always felt. Sundar continued, explaining how at that age he could not fully understand the weight of that choice. But as he grew older, he realized that his parents had given up comfort for his future. He said, "That night, I promised myself I would never waste their sacrifice. Every late night of study, every hour of struggle, I carried their faces in my heart. Their resilience became my courage." The audience felt the words not just as his memory, but as a mirror of countless families across India. Everyone had seen or heard of such sacrifices, and now it was given voice by a man who had risen to the highest stages of the world. Narendra Modi sat quietly, his eyes fixed on Sundar. For a moment, he closed his eyes, almost as if he was remembering his own mother's sacrifices. Then he opened them slowly, and the respect in his gaze was clear. But Sundar was not finished. He shared how this moment carried forward into his later years. When he went abroad for studies, money was still tight. He often had to manage with little, sometimes skipping small comforts that others around him took for granted. He remembered sitting in his small room, thinking of home, and reminding himself of his parents' sacrifices. Those thoughts gave him strength when everything felt overwhelming. He told the audience, "Sometimes people think success is about ambition alone. But the truth is, it is also about memory. When you remember where you came from, when you remember who lifted you, then even in the hardest times you cannot give up, because giving up would mean breaking the chain of sacrifice." Those lines carried power. People felt chills run through them. Some wiped silent tears, realizing how true those words were. Narendra Modi finally spoke, his voice low but steady. He said, "Your story is not only about your rise, Sundar. It is about the strength of every parent who believes in their child. It is about the unseen sacrifices that create greatness. India bows not only to you but to your parents, who showed what true resilience means." The hall erupted in applause, but once again Sundar raised his hand for silence. He looked out into the audience and said, "There is still more I must share. Because sometimes life teaches lessons not only through family, but also through strangers who show kindness when you least expect it." His words created suspense again. The audience waited, eager to hear about the unexpected kindness that had shaped him further, a kindness that perhaps changed the course of his journey. The room was heavy with silence once more. Sundar's voice had carried the weight of sacrifice, and the audience was still holding on to those feelings when he continued. This time his tone shifted, softer, as if he was about to share a memory that still touched him deeply. He said, "Life often teaches us not only through family, but also through strangers. There was a day when I understood how kindness can change a journey." He paused, looking at the faces before him. "I was in my college years, traveling by train to attend an important examination. The journey was long, the train was crowded, and I had very little money with me. When the ticket collector came, I realized I had miscalculated and was short of a few rupees. I felt panic rising inside me, and I did not know what to do. I thought he might remove me from the train, and I would lose the chance to attend that exam." The audience listened with unease. Many knew the fear of such a situation, where one mistake could shatter an opportunity. Sundar continued, "As I sat there, nervous and helpless, a man sitting beside me noticed. He was a simple traveler, carrying nothing more than a small cloth bag. Without asking anything, He quietly slipped the missing coins into my hand. I looked at him in shock. I asked him why he would help a stranger. He smiled and said, "Someday, when you see another boy in trouble, help him too. That is how kindness travels." The words struck the hall like lightning. The audience felt the purity of that moment. It was not grand, not dramatic, but it was powerful. Sundar's eyes softened as he said, "I never saw that man again, but his face stayed with me forever. I carried his lesson through every stage of my life. I realized that kindness does not need wealth, it only needs heart. And that day, I promised myself to never forget the stranger who helped me sit in that exam hall." The hall remained still, many people visibly moved. Sundar explained how he carried that moment with him, even when he moved to the United States. When life was tough and loneliness surrounded him, he remembered that small act of kindness. He said it reminded him that humanity was bigger than success, and no matter how far he went, he had to remain humble enough to give back. Narendra Modi leaned forward again, his face thoughtful. He spoke in a steady voice. "This is the strength of our culture, Sundar. India has always believed that kindness is the greatest wealth. A stranger's coin can become a nation's pride when it inspires greatness." The audience broke into applause again, but Sundar's eyes showed that he was still lost in that memory. He said, "People think technology builds the future, but I believe kindness builds it first. Without kindness, all progress is empty." His words carried deep meaning. And then, with a slight pause, he added, "But life tested me once again, not only with kindness, but with moments of rejection, failure, and pain. Those moments taught me resilience in a way that kindness alone could not." The audience straightened in their seats, sensing the suspense of what he was about to share next. The story of failure, the story of rejection. Everyone knew such moments existed even for great people, but hearing them in his own voice would change everything. The hall grew tense as Sundar spoke of failure. Until now, his story had been filled with sacrifice, kindness, and resilience. But the mention of rejection created a new silence. People wanted to know what struggles someone like Sundar, who reached the top of the world, had once faced. He said, "When we look at success from the outside, it seems smooth, like a straight road. But the truth is that success is built on broken steps, painful rejections, and doors that close when you most need them open. I faced such moments more than once." He leaned slightly forward, his voice steady but heavy. "When I applied for scholarships to study abroad, I was rejected many times. I remember reading letters that said, 'We regret to inform you,' and each time my heart sank. I wondered if I was not good enough, if perhaps I had been foolish to dream so far. I thought of my parents' sacrifices and felt the weight of failure pressing on me." The audience could feel his pain as if it was their own. Sundar continued, "But every time I received rejection, I remembered my father's words. He used to say, 'A closed door is not the end. It is just telling you to knock harder.' So I knocked again. I applied again. I prepared better, and I refused to let rejection decide my future." His words were powerful. The audience felt the strength of a young man who stood against despair and kept walking. Sundar then shared how, even after joining work, there were moments when projects failed, when ideas were dismissed, and when his voice was overlooked in crowded rooms. He said, "It is easy to feel invisible in such moments. But I learned that invisibility is also strength, because it teaches patience. Sometimes, silence speaks louder than arguments." Narendra Modi's eyes reflected admiration. He knew the pain of rejection too, the long years of struggle before leadership came. He nodded slowly, as if he was not only listening, but also remembering his own journey. Sundar then shared one turning point. He said, "There was a time I was interviewed for a role I deeply wanted, and I believed I was ready. I gave my best, but the answer was no. For days, I carried that pain inside. But later, I realized that rejection had protected me. If I had taken that role, I would not have walked the path that eventually led me to where I stand today. Sometimes rejection is not failure, it is redirection." The hall broke into applause, but Sundar raised his hand gently, urging calm. "Rejection taught me humility. It taught me that we cannot control every outcome, but we can control our effort. And as long as our effort is honest, the path will open, even if it takes time." The audience was deeply moved. Many were thinking of their own failures, their own lost chances, and suddenly they felt lighter, as if Sundar's words had given them new meaning. Narendra Modi spoke, his voice filled with respect. "Your story shows that failure is not the opposite of success. It is the teacher of success. India admires you not only because you rose, but because you never stopped walking when the road was broken." The applause returned, stronger, but Sundar's eyes were calm. He said, "Yes, failure was my teacher. But there was another moment, one that tested not my patience but my courage. It was the moment when I had to choose between an easy path and a hard one, between comfort and responsibility." The suspense grew again. The audience leaned closer, waiting to hear the next part of his journey, the choice that would test not only his resilience but also his character. The hall was still, every listener waiting for the next moment in Sundar's journey. His voice had already carried them through sacrifice, kindness, and rejection. Now, he spoke of a decision that tested not just his patience, but his heart. He said, "Life does not only test us through struggles. Sometimes it tests us through choices, and those choices decide who we become. I remember a time when I was offered comfort on one side and responsibility on the other. It was one of the hardest moments of my life." The audience leaned forward. Sundar's voice grew slower, as if he was reliving that crossroad. "I had been working abroad for some years, and I was finally beginning to find stability. Life was becoming easier, and for the first time, I felt I could relax. But then, news came from home. My father's health was weakening. He never asked me to return. He never told me to give up what I was doing, but I could hear the silence in his voice when we spoke. I knew he wanted me close, yet he wanted me free." His words filled the hall with emotion. Sundar continued, "I stood in my small apartment for nights, asking myself what mattered more. Comfort told me to stay where I was, to build my own world. But responsibility told me to remember the man who had given me his world. I thought of the day he spent our savings for my education, and I knew then what I must do. I went home." The audience drew a deep breath. Some even closed their eyes, feeling the weight of that sacrifice. Sundar went on, "Those months at home were not easy. I managed my work from a distance. I faced financial strain again, but I do not regret a single moment. I sat by my father, listened to his stories, and watched his strength even in weakness. I learned that responsibility is not a burden, it is an honor." Narendra Modi's face softened as he listened. His own life had been filled with choices between personal comfort and public duty. He nodded, his eyes glistening with understanding. Sundar added, "When I returned later to continue my work, I felt stronger than before. It was as though the blessing of responsibility had given me new courage. I realized that success without responsibility is empty. It may shine on the outside, but it is hollow inside. True strength comes when you can carry the weight of others, not only yourself." The hall broke into applause once again, but it was not loud or hurried. It was slow, rising like a wave of respect. Sundar raised his hand gently, and the room calmed again. He then said, "But life had one more lesson for me. It was a lesson about recognition. The world often notices you when you rise, but the real question is, how do you remain the same person when that recognition comes? How do you stay humble when the lights are brightest? His words brought suspense once more. People were eager to know how Sundar, a man who had reached the top of one of the greatest companies in the world, had managed to remain grounded in humility. The hall was waiting, almost holding its breath. Sundar had spoken of sacrifice, kindness, rejection, and responsibility. Now he began to speak about recognition and how it tested him in ways that struggle never did. He said, "The world begins to notice you only after you rise. People see the success, the titles, the position, but they rarely see the journey behind it. I was asked once, how do you stay humble when the world praises you? My answer is simple. I never forgot where I came from. I never forgot the dust of my streets, the long walks to school, the nights when my parents sacrificed their comfort so I could dream." His voice carried deep sincerity. When people place you on a stage, it is easy to believe you are above others. But the truth is, no one stands alone. I am here because of my parents, my teachers, strangers who showed kindness, and even those who rejected me, for they pushed me to try harder. When I remember that, humility is not something I practice. It is something that comes naturally. The audience was silent again, but their silence was full of respect. Sundar went on, "Fame and recognition can confuse a person. They can make you forget your roots. But for me, my roots are the strength that keeps me steady. The smell of my village, the lessons of my father, the simplicity of my mother. These are the things that protect me from pride. They remind me that greatness is not about titles, but about values." At that moment, Narendra Modi leaned forward, his hands joined together, and spoke slowly with deep emotion. "Sundar, today you have not just shared your journey, you have shared the soul of India. Our nation has always believed that strength is born in simplicity, and you are living proof of it. You rose to the highest stage in the world, but you carried your roots with you. That is why India admires you." The Prime Minister's words filled the hall with energy, but then something unexpected happened. As the applause began, Modi stood up. He turned to Sundar, and in front of everyone, he bowed his head once more, this time lower than before. It was not a bow to a CEO, not even a bow to an individual. It was a bow to humility, to values, to the spirit of resilience that Sundar had carried from his roots to the world stage. The hall erupted in thunderous applause, many people standing, their hands joining in respect. Sundar rose from his chair, his face overwhelmed with emotion. He quickly bent forward too, returning the gesture of respect to Modi. In that simple moment, two great sons of India bowed to each other, not as leader and CEO, but as humble men honoring the spirit of humanity. The audience could feel their hearts trembling with pride. Tears rolled in many eyes. They knew they were not only witnessing a conversation, but also a message for generations, that greatness is not about power or wealth. Greatness is about remembering your roots, honoring sacrifice, and staying humble even when the world bows to you. Sundar ended with these words, "If my story leaves you with anything, let it be this. Never forget where you came from, never forget those who lifted you, and never forget to lift others when you rise. That is the only way respect becomes real." The final applause shook the hall, but above the sound, what remained strongest was the silence in people's hearts, the silence of reflection, of admiration, and of pride.